These are 7 principles that I've learned. These are 7 principles that I've developed over the last 10 years making feature films that you can use for your own productions. If you don't know who I am, my name's Alexi Uzas. I'm a film producer based in Australia. I run a company called Exile Entertainment and we produce feature films. So let's take you through what these 7 principles are that I've developed. I'm going to take you through them in a bit of a linear fashion. So we're going to start when you're kind of prepping a film, starting a film, getting on board a film, choosing a project, all the way through production, through to post, and getting the film out into the world. So let's start at the top end. Now, some of these are going to be films or principles that I developed based on productions where I was the lead producer, and others were more relevant where it was a co-production. So I was co-producing the film with another company. So I'll make sure that you know which ones those are because I think it's important to know that distinction. So let's get into it. Number one, if you're co-producing a film and you're going to be leaning on your network, your contacts, you're going to be really throwing a lot of your resources into that production, then it is important for you to have some sort of control over the decision making. Now, this is a principle that I learned when I was initially attached as an executive producer on a film, but it quickly morphed into more of a co-producing arrangement. And so I was really relying on a lot, or actually leaning on a lot of my own suppliers and my network and my contacts. And what ended up happening is I didn't have control over the SPV. So an SPV is a special purpose vehicle. It's a company that's set up to actually make the film. Because I came into this project late, actually when it was in post-production, I didn't have any control over that company. And so I wasn't able to actually make any decisions. All those decisions still were with the producer who had that company. And so that created a situation where even though it was all my resources, all my contacts, and my network, that was really assisting this film to get finance and to get through post-production, didn't have any decision-making authority. And that made it really hard whenever we ran into issues. It became difficult for me to be able to exert any kind of control over how that project was being produced. And of course, how it was being produced was affecting the people that we were working with. So that was a really important one. So if you're going to be co-producing with another company, then make sure you really understand, if you are contributing resources, network contacts, understand how much control, decision-making authority you have over the project. But really importantly, from a corporate structure point of view, ideally you are an owner or a shareholder, a director is even more important of that company, because then you have real control over it, right? It's not just quasi-control, you really have control over the decision-making. So that's number one. Also, I'm a little bit sick now, so please excuse the sniffles and the voice. Number two is script. So a couple of things that I've learned is, number one is the script needs to go through some sort of formal creative development process, and it needs to be interrogated the whole way through. So what do I mean by this? Well, it means that it's okay to write a script, maybe it's a producer, writer, director, those sorts of things, but you really want to take it through a process where you do get outside input on the project. So that could mean some sort of script consultant, it could mean some sort of development funds that you receive from a government agency, right, where you're getting feedback on it. It could mean just getting it out to peers. Those things are really important for the development process. Now, I did a video last week where I spoke about how too much feedback can actually become a bit of a hindrance for your project. It can get you stuck. So there is a fine line between how much feedback you get, but taking that through some sort of formal process where you agree on, all right, you're going to deliver a draft by this time frame, then we're going to get it reviewed by this person, then we're going to go through another draft, really fleshing that out and making sure it is a formal process is a lesson that I've learned along the way. In tandem with that, it's a lesson that once you start taking that script out past just consultants and coverage to the marketplace, so just to distributors, to sales agents, then the feedback you get from those companies is vital to the film's prospects. So if at that point you're getting signs that the film is great, right? You're getting like lots of offers from distributors, multiple distributors, you're able to kind of take your pick, then that's a good sign. It means you've got a really great script. If you go and pitch your project and no one wants it, all right, no one's really making any strong offers, maybe there's no MGs on the table, then it's likely a sign that there's something wrong with the script. So one thing that I've learned in that kind of feedback formal creative development process is the rubber doesn't really hit the road until you start pitching the film out to the marketplace. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. The third principle, and flows on from that, is that you must have distribution locked in during financing. So this is a big one for me. I would not put any film into production without distribution in place. In fact, I was attached to a project recently where I was an EP, and we weren't able to get a distributor attached to the project. And so ultimately, me and the filmmakers parted ways. Right? I didn't see that there was a way for that film to continue going out and trying to raise finance on it without that distribution in place. So getting distribution in place during financing helps for a few reasons. Number one, like I just mentioned, it's a litmus test, right? Like it's a really good, it's a good indicator that your film has value in the market if someone in another company is willing to put up an MG. The other reason is it contributes to your finance plan, so you get finance from that distributor into your finance plan that you can use to make the film. And the third thing is that it gives your private investors a lot of confidence in the project, because if you go and pitch it to investors and it's just you with a script, like it's not really an appealing package, and they're having to take a big leap of faith, right? You're just a filmmaker with a script. But if you can go out and attach a distributor, a sales agent to your project, now you're showing that there are like third parties who have seen value in your project and are willing to back up that value by putting up their cash, right? They're willing to put in skin in the game through an MG. So that's one that, like, you know, for me, it's just like it has to be in place beforehand. Otherwise, there's no chance you make the film. You're just taking too much of a risk. You're putting too much investor money at risk if you don't have that stuff sewn up beforehand. Now, don't get me wrong. You can still go and make the film and it can still not land. It can still, you know, not be a hit. It can still lose money. Those things are all true. But getting distribution in place first de-risks the project, and I think it de-risks it for investors in a big way. Number 4 is branding. So one thing I've learned over the years is that it's important for the films that you make to fit your overall company or personal brand, right? And I think like that is something that people, audiences, also for like filmmakers and people in the industry who ideally you're going to work with at some point, they take notice of. And if they can come to your website or look at your IMDb profile and it's really congruent in terms of the films that you're trying to make, I think it really helps. It helps attract the right people then to your brand. And so I've been guilty in the past of like not sticking to that. I think I was able to stick to that very closely when I was distributing films. But then when I was producing, obviously the pressures as well of just getting films into production meant that I wasn't always choosing films necessarily that like fit the brands, will just fit the brand properly. So that was a big one. It's kind of as a side thing to that is it's also important to do some research into the filmmakers or people who you're working with, right? So their track record, their reputation is just as important, because if you make a film with them, you're going to be going out to the marketplace and you're going to be, again, like leaning on your contacts, leaning on your suppliers to make this film. And so if that filmmaker's reputation or track record isn't good to begin with, it is going to affect you. I've had that in the past where I've worked with other producers, and it's caused me issues down the track with financiers just because of their reputation. So that's a really important one. Something that I've learned is you really have to carefully examine everyone's reputation before you start working with them and look at their track record. Number 5 is... we did distribution. So number 5 is hiring crew. A couple of things I've learned with hiring crew is that, number 1, it's really important that they have experience in the role that they're being hired to do and ideally at the same scale as your current project. Okay? So, if you're looking for a production designer for your feature film, ideally you have someone who has worked as a production designer, and ideally they have done it in a feature film before. Now, it's not always going to be possible, right? Because people still have to make their first feature film, and I'm definitely all for working with people who have, who want to take that step up to feature films. So I would say it's more important that they've worked in that role, ideally on the same scale, but if not on the same scale, then just the one down. So, for example, if you want to hire a production designer and they haven't worked on a feature film, then they should at least have credits as a production designer on short films, as opposed to having like art assistant credits on a short film. And now they're going not just up into another scale, which is feature film, they're also going up into another role. So that's a lot for someone to take on. And I think it's a bit of a recipe for, problems to go wrong on set. So that's a big one with the hiring process. It's just making sure that they have that experience in the right role, ideally at the right scale. The second thing is that if you're thinking about getting a crew member to invest some of their fees into the film, or they're going to put up some sort of investment in the film, or they're even just going to invest their gear into the film, right? So they're going to, they're not going to get paid for that gear. They're willing to put it in. You need to, if you're going to do that, then you need to be aware that it can, if things go wrong on set for whatever reason, with that crew member, then it does create a bit of an awkward situation. And in some ways, they do have a bit of leverage over you, right? They have their gear on set. You haven't budgeted for paying for that gear from somewhere else, right? So if they just walk, then they're taking their gear with them. If they've invested cash, they might feel like they've, kind of gone in too far. So it's not to say that don't do it, but I think for me, one thing that I've learned is it's not something that I want to do going forward, right? It's if I've got crew members on set, they just need to be paid for their, time, need to be paid for their gear. I think if you're trying to do these investments with them, it can create issues. Not to say it would create issues every time, but I think for both of you, even for the crew member, right? Because sometimes it's just the stresses of the shoot that gets you to that place. It's not necessarily anything wrong or anything wrong with the relationship. It's just the stress of production. And so even for both sides, I think it's just cleaner not to have those types of arrangements. The sixth one is company resources. So if you're going to go into a project and make a project, then I think you want to make sure of two things. And this is something that I think about a lot now. Number one is you need to be able to go all in on that project in terms of your company capital and your resources, or your personal capital and resources. So when I go all in, I'm not saying like risk everything and, make stupid decisions. I'm just saying that you need to be in a financial position where if things go wrong on set and the film requires additional resources from you personally or from your company, you want to be in a position where you can provide those resources, just so you don't run into an issue where you've gone over budget or you've eaten up all your contingency and you literally don't have any cash left. So making sure that you're just in a really good financial position before you start making a film is very important in my view, and something that now I'm like way more conscious of. The second thing is that's kind of relevant to this and relevant to like resources is you want to carefully assess the opportunity cost of actually committing to a project. So if you commit to this project, what are you saying no to, right? What is the opportunity cost? So I've had this, particularly with films where I've executive produced or maybe like co-produced, where looking back, probably just the opportunity cost of those things was too high. By the time, I put all my work in, all the company resources, the fee that we got just wasn't large enough. And actually, I could have probably been spending that time on other projects that would have paid more and potentially had greater return as well. So really carefully assessing those projects at the outset is something, again, now I think about like way more. If we're going to get involved in a project, especially one that I'm lead producing, it's just, you want to be doing it for the right reasons and making sure that the opportunity cost of that isn't high. And then the seventh and final principle is that when you're in the edit, it's another really important time where you're getting feedback. And again, feedback of like friends in a room, like getting 20 friends or 30 friends in a room to watch your film during the edit, that's not feedback, right? That is extremely biased, and it's really not going to serve you. I've done those screenings before, and I can tell you now, it's rare that you get the feedback that you need. So what does proper feedback look like? Ideally, it looks like a test screening where you hire a company, a marketing company, and they hire out a cinema and they get 200 to 300 people in there and they run a questionnaire and they do a focus group at the end. And then you've got real feedback. You've got unbiased feedback on that project. Now, the reason that, again, that's important is because at this point, the film is so insular, right? Not many people have seen it. Really, probably only industry people have either read it or been involved in it. And so the general public hasn't seen it. It hasn't really come across this project, hasn't really interacted with it at any time. And the studios do this type of like audience screening all the time. But now for me, even as an independent, this is something that is an absolute must on every film that I do going forward. It can be expensive. It costs like 10 to 15K to do one of these. But now these things are just in the budget for me, right? And they're in there from the get-go. The other thing with editing is just like you need time. You need the proper time to be able to edit the film. So trying to get through the edit in like 10 weeks or even 12 weeks, like it's just too fast. You can't rush the edit. I've rushed the edit in the past and it doesn't lead to good results. And so making sure, that I have 14, 16 weeks now in an edit is really important to me because, if we're going to do a test screening, well, the editor is probably going to have to finish editing the week before because those files then need to be converted. You need to create like a DCP if you're going to make it at a cinema. So there's like almost a week that you lose of dead time of just like, yes, they can still be tinkering, but also they're kind of waiting for this feedback now. So you need to also allow for these rounds of feedback that come in, and that's going to mean that you lose days or weeks here and there. And so having that proper time it just gives you the time that you need to get the edit right without rushing. They say the film's made 3 times during writing, directing, and editing. So it's just such a key piece of it. So those are the 7 principles. They've covered a kind of range of different areas over the production process. But I hope that you can now use these on your productions at the outset and not have to go through all those kind of lessons and mistakes that I made along the way. Now, if you do want to work with me in order to help you get your film financed and get it produced and, again, avoid a bunch of these mistakes and others, then just head to the link in the description and you can set up a time to speak with me about your film. All right, that's it for this one. See you on the next one.